Go.
When studying our joints and how they move, we classify them into planes of motion. A plane of motion can be defined as a two-dimensional surface, imaginary two-dimensional surface, through which a limb or a body segment can move. There are three basic kinds of planes of motion. The first is sagittal. Sagittal plane of motion divides us in half lengthways into left and right sides. The frontal plane of motion divides us in half through center into front and back halves. And lastly, the transverse plane of motion divides us in half from top to bottom. And the other type of plane of motion is called the diagonal or the oblique plane of motion, and it is a combination of one or more of these three planes of motion that I already spoke about. Most of our movements do occur on the diagonal. I'm going to demonstrate movements in the sagittal, frontal, transverse planes using the lumbar spine, the shoulder, the hip, and the knee joints as examples. So in the sagittal plane, if I come out of extension, when I'm fully erect, the spine is extended. If I roll down, I come out of extension and I come into flexion in the lumbar spine. Lift back up, stand, I'm back up into an extended spine. If I take the arm out front, my shoulder joint is in flexion, bring it back beside me, reach it behind, the shoulder joint is now in extension, and come back. If I bring up the leg, the hip and the knee are now in flexion in the sagittal plane. When I bring the leg back down, they are now fully extended in the sagittal plane. Next we have the frontal plane of motion. Movements in the frontal plane are abduction and adduction. So if I take the leg away from me, the hip and the knee are now externally abducted out to the side, sorry. If I bring the leg back in, it adducts back in. If I draw the arm out to the side, shoulder is now in abduction. Draw it back into my body, it is now adducted. If I lean over to the side, I go into lateral flexion, which is the lumbar spine on the frontal plane. The transverse plane, David, I'm doing a video here. In the transverse plane, we have movements that are internal and external rotation. So if I bring the leg up and I take it out to the side, I'm now in the transverse plane. The hip and the knee are externally rotated. Bring the leg back in, I'm sagittal, fully sit back down. I take the arm out and I take the arms out to the side. I have external rotation in the shoulders and the elbows. If I draw back in, internal rotation. And the last one is taking the arm out to the side. If I draw it across the body, that's a transverse or horizontal adduction of the arm. If I reach it back, away, then it's transverse or horizontal abduction of the arm. The last movements would be in the oblique, or the combination. So a movement combining some of the different planes of motion. If I walk my feet apart, my legs become abducted, that's the transverse plane. If I hinge forward, I'm now in the sagittal plane, and if I add a rotation, it's transverse. I mean a combination of all three of the planes of motion. And that's my video.
And what do I do with it now?
Stop it. Told you.